coaching session that we are starting with. Another coaching cycle is our third series with our bestest coach that we have in Awiska, supporting entrepreneurs, supporting professionals out there to understand the movement of dangerous goods. So everyone, just a reminder that please keep your video off. Mandy, we love you and thank you for joining. Can we make sure that we have all muted? We'll definitely get a chance where you are asking questions. I'm going to give you that opportunity as always that I do that. But again, we are on a third series. We are discussing the transportation of dangerous goods, and it's another area where a lot of people are afraid of because you have flammable goods out there. We had our first session where we got to understand what dangerous goods are and what is required at the regulatory level. Now, the second session that we had, it was around the movement of gas. So guess what? Today, we are discussing the transportation of flammable liquids. Who is interested in that? I want to know where you are from. What are you interested in, guys? With this transportation of liquid products, do you know what we're going to discuss? Or you just come in here saying that level coaches, Richard, coaches, we want to understand around the transportation of dangerous liquids. Like I said, I am joined by Mr. Richard Durant. Richard, I have to give you this feedback. Please show your face there in front of everyone. I have a lot of entrepreneurs that are part of my Instagram live sessions, and I know that they are also joining the sessions now. Most of them has given me a lot of feedback in terms of the work that you are doing, that they are grateful of the sessions. It's making a difference for them to understand the industry. In fact, they are at a stage where they're feeling that, no, this is not the biggest mountain to climb. There's specific regulatory things that you have to comply with, understand the business, and they are grateful for your input. And from my side and on their behalf, I have to say thank you for your commitment. I know Richard is on holiday, guys, but he still made time to have a discussion with us. So with that, I want you know the drill. Any questions, please post them on the chat box. Any questions for Richard? I hope you are prepared for that. Ask the questions. For those that are joining us from Facebook, those that are joining us from LinkedIn, a special welcome to yourself. Again, if you have any questions, please, we will be checking the questions that you have online. I will be checking them and Richard will be able to respond to that. So Richard, it's your day. Talk to us, tell us anything and everything around liquid products. What is it? What are we talking about? What is this liquid products? And how do we prepare ourselves to safely move liquid products that are flammable in the industry? Thank you, Richard. You can proceed on your side.
Thank you, Lebo, and thanks for the opportunity, and thanks everybody for joining. I just need to boast, I'm in the Eastern Cape, very close to the sea. I can hear the sea in the background. So, yeah, as Lebo said, I'm actually on leave or on holiday, but when you're self-employed, you're never really on holiday. So got to keep the wheels turning, as they say in the industry. But yeah, thanks for the opportunity, and I hope I can bring some value to your audience and through this session. Just as a starter, flammable liquids are highly flammable, as they say. So it is not something to be to take lightly. I don't want to scare anybody off, but we do need to make sure that if we are going to get into the transport of flammable liquids, we understand the risks and the hazards involved. So what I'd like to do is share my screen so we can get on with my presentation. And then we can then, if I can find it, there we go. We can then get on with some of the detail. So, as Lebo said, this is our session around what we call Class 3 flammable liquids. Class 1, as we said right in the beginning, in previous sessions. Class 1 was explosives. Class 2 was gases. Class 3 is flammable liquids. So I'll go into more detail with that shortly, but just for those of you that this might be your first session, my name is Richard. I have a company called Transcheck Consulting and Auditing, and the details are up on the screen. If you do need to get hold of me, contact me, preferably on email. Then I'll try and answer any questions that you've got, or you can do it through Lebo or Rose, and they can send questions through to me. I do have a website as well, so you can pick up some information off my website. I need to change. Hang on, my screen is not. There we go. So flammable liquids. These are the hazard diamonds that are used for flammable liquids. When we say hazard diamonds, these are what appears on the placarding on your vehicles. It will also appear on the placarding of the packages that you might be transporting if it's packaged flammable liquids. The top row are an example of the flammable liquid signage that we use in South Africa, where it has a pictogram, the word flammable liquid, and then at the bottom of the diamond is a 3, which indicates that it's a class 3 flammable liquid. The white flame or the black flame can be used. It depends on the background that these pictograms are on. So both of them are acceptable. The pictograms in the lower section of the screen, which don't have the words flammable liquids on, are what is being used by the United Nations. The UN model regulations used a lot in Europe. And when we say Europe, it extends far broader than just Europe. It extends into this country we're tending to hear a lot about these days, being Russia. There, and a lot of even Ukraine and those countries, they don't write in English, they write in their own languages. They have their own words and figures and letters. So that's why there's no description of the flammable liquid on there. It is only the pictogram and the class and the 3 depicting the class. So either of those in this country are acceptable. So that's what we're looking at, is your flammable liquids. That's what you need to look for. As I say, if it's a package, if it's a vehicle, has it got that label on it? And that tells you whether it's flammable. A very brief definition, and it gets very technical, but a brief definition: a flammable liquid is a combustible liquid which can easily be ignited in air at ambient temperatures. So to simplify that even further, if you can light that liquid with a match in a saucer or something like that, you can take methylated spirits that a lot of us have in our kitchens, is classified as flammable liquid. It burns very easily. It ignites very easily. So that is the simplified version. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on some of the products which are maybe not that flammable, but are still considered as flammable liquids. So up on the screen now are some examples of flammable liquids. So the first, and I've tried to group them into 3 different groups. Your liquid fuels, which we know pretty well, is your petrol, your diesel, your IP/IK, or IP is illuminating paraffin or illuminating kerosene, different terminologies for it, but paraffin. Jet fuel, which is a derivative of paraffin, and things like avgas, aviation fuel. Those are all classed as flammable liquids. Petrol, of all of those, and avgas aviation fuel are the most flammable. Diesel is not terribly flammable because it's actually an oil as opposed to a flammable liquid. But when it does burn, when it does start to burn, it burns very, very fiercely. So it is grouped in as flammable liquid, the same as paraffin and jet fuel. I'll show you a picture a bit later of an accident where the vehicle was transporting a mixed load of petrol and diesel, and you'll see some of those results. Other flammable liquids are things like your liquid solvents. These are just some of them. MEK, which is, I can't remember the full term now. Methyl ethyl ketone, I think it is. Styrene, toluene, alcohol, ethylene, hexane, xylene, and a lot of those go into printing inks. I've done a fire investigation at a plant stroke warehouse in Johannesburg, in Cleveland, in Johannesburg, where they specialized in blending printing inks for printing on plastic bags and that type of thing. And they had a very serious fire, and the whole warehouse burnt out because it was full of liquid solvents. So not to be played with. And then the other, which we also have a lot to do with, even in our households, is paint, oil-based paints, not your PVAs, but the oil-based paints are flammable. Also, it's difficult to get them to burn, but should they start burning, very difficult to extinguish as well. And that is because of the solvents that are in those paints. And those solvents go further. If you need to clean your paintbrush when you've been painting your cupboard or something like that, you're using turpentine or thinners, and both very, very flammable as well. So those are just some of the examples of flammable liquids that we could be using almost, or have some exposure to almost on a daily basis. So some of the suppliers of flammable liquids, Sasol are a major producer of fuels and of solvents. Their Secunda plant is as I understand, one of the world's biggest producers of solvents. They export solvents from Secunda all over the world. So they're a large producer of solvents and of fuels. And then there's your traditional oil companies, and just some of them, Total, Shell, BP, Engine. A lot of them have fuel companies, as I said, traditional oil companies, but they also produce solvents. Solvents are largely a byproduct of the fuel distillation process. So when they're producing fuel, they are producing a range of solvents. And then there's the other sort of specialist chemical suppliers, for example, BASF and others that are also selling solvents into the market. So I touched on it just now, the high risk, flammable liquids are a very high risk, or very high risk products. They're highly flammable in that they burn fiercely. They're environmentally harmful. And I'm here referring to spills and leaks into the ground, into groundwater. So if there is a spill, you need to be very careful and very quick to clean up, and especially if it gets into water courses, etc. Fortunately, a lot of them are lighter than water, so will float on water. So they're relatively easy to clean off the surface of water. The other risk is that static electricity is generated when pumping or flowing of these liquids. And I touched on the warehouse fire that I worked on not too long ago. That The root cause of that was static electricity. They hadn't earthed their equipment properly, and the flow of product between two containers generated static somewhere. We think we know what it is. It was the static generated a spark, which ignited the fumes, and there was, as I say, the whole warehouse was burnt out. And the other one is that especially your fuels are highly saleable. As the cost of fuels is going up, theft and vehicle hijacking is going to become more common. So I term it as liquid gold. You know, we're up over 22 Rand a litre. So the risk, other than your flammability, is the saleability. And the drivers often have a lot of time to think about how they can get around the systems to take a couple of litres either out the side tanks of their vehicles or out of the tankers themselves to make a little bit of extra on the sideline. So if you're going into flammable, if you're going into fuel specifically, be very, very aware that there's this high risk of theft. This is a picture of a load of solvents that went down Fields Hill. Town Hill in Pietermaritzburg. The driver didn't stop at the compulsory stop at the top of Town Hill, and then overcooked his brakes and careered down the hill. There was roadworks taking place. His truck plowed into some of the roadworking machinery. A number of people were killed in this incident, and you can see in the picture a huge fire then ensued. And so that's an example of what can happen. Everything was under control until the driver decided, or for whatever reason, didn't stop at the compulsory stop, and that's the result. So things can happen very quickly. This is you probably saw in the media about 2 weeks ago, there was a bus accident in the Eastern Cape near East London. It was a mixed load of petrol and diesel on its way for a delivery, a bus coming in the opposite direction. And I don't know all the information, but I do know the transporter, and I've had dealings with that transporter. It would appear that the bus driver fell asleep, came across the road and plowed into the tanker, which was coming up the hill. Bus was going down the hill, and a number of people were killed. The bus was written off. The tanker was burnt out completely. The tanker driver was killed in that accident. I said earlier it was a mixed load of petrol and diesel. The petrol would have ignited very easily, and with that temperature, it ignited the diesel, and the whole tanker was, as I say, tanker and truck were burnt out. So, not to scare you on off, but be aware, we're dealing with a time bomb, a possible time bomb.
Richard, if I may just interject,
yes.
And I like what you are really discussing around, the sectors that are the manufacturers of all this flammable liquid. What about because you always find some people, in fact, importing fuel, diesel out there. From those organizations' perspective, are they as stringent? Because, you indicated one of the things that the safety issues, and I'm looking at these pictures as well. And I've seen organizations like Sasol, organizations, let me say the chemical business in totality, they are very stringent from the safety perspective in terms of moving such products. So my question more is around any external organizations, are they stringent? And from the requirements perspective, are they complying to the same requirements that the big industry are always looking at, from your knowledge perspective?
That's a good question. So most of the products that are imported into this country are being imported by the bigger companies, whether it's fuel or solvents, fuel or chemicals. It's normally coming in through one of the bigger ones, but there are importers out there that they couldn't care at all, even though in terms of our Road Traffic Act, transport of dangerous goods, they have certain responsibilities. They just want to get that product out into the market. So you as a transporter need to ensure that if your consignor is not keeping up their side of the deal, that you are closing the gaps to ensure that when that product is loaded, you've got the correct documentation, the correct authorities, your driver, your vehicle, all of that is in place. Because Lebo was correct, Sasol and Engine and Shell, all of them, if you are going to go and load at those facilities, are going to inspect your vehicle. They're going to ensure that your driver's got a correct license, that he's been trained, etc., etc. So it's a very valid point. And there's also imported fuel coming into South Africa from Mozambique. I don't know of the particular safety requirements if you want to load in Mozambique, but yeah, it's the same principle. Make sure that you're doing it correctly. Don't rely on somebody else to tell you what to do. Make sure you, because, and I've said it, I'm sure I've said it before, it's often your biggest risk in this sort of instance is your insurance company. The insurer is, if you have an accident, the insurer is going to look for some reason to repudiate your claim. So make sure that they don't find any reason, that you've taken due process, due precautions to ensure that your vehicle, your driver, etc., are all compliant. Otherwise, there's a risk that your insurer might say, sorry, you weren't compliant with the law. So on that basis, we repudiate your claim.
Okay, I'm glad that you're raising that, Richard, because another question is more on the insurance side, considering that with flammable liquids, there's so much higher risk around it. I take it that, when you're talking about insurance, like goods in transit insurance is normally, the highest as compared to the non-dangerous goods. Yes.
So in terms of our legislation, dangerous goods legislation, there's no legal requirement to have goods in transit insurance. Okay. But if you consider what the price of diesel or petrol is these days, you're looking at close to 800,000 Rand, the replacement value just for a load of fuel. And your solvents could be more. You could be up to R1 million, just the replacement value of the loss of the product, never mind the loss of the vehicle, etc., etc. The other side is the other insurance that you have to have in terms of the legislation for transport of dangerous goods is environmental insurance. So if your tanker turns over and the product runs into the river, you need to have insurance in place to clean up, to make good your pollution that you've created. Because in terms of the National Environmental Management Act, the polluter pays. So it's written into legislation that you need to have environmental insurance. It doesn't specify what the value is, what you have, what your insurance must cover, but that's up to you as a transporter to consider the risk together with your insurer and say, do I need 5 million, 10 million, 20 million? I know some of the big companies are saying minimum of 20 million insurance cover for environmental. So that's another another cost to consider when you're looking at the transport of flammable liquids or any dangerous goods. Does that help you, Level?
And I always have to ask these questions on behalf of the entrepreneurs so that they understand also the costs associated
Yes.
with this industry. Because sometimes if you don't ask and you don't even tell them upfront, they wouldn't know. So I always have my list and making sure that you know, for the sake of other entrepreneurs, they also understand. And I'm you know, all these other companies, Richard. And maybe also what I need to flag is that for everyone to know that if you have a broker that's helping you with your insurance for your trucking business, always make sure that you indicate that, because they will ask you what type of product you are moving, and then ask them to advise you as well on additional insurance that is needed specifically for your product. Because what Richard is really flagging here is that from the environmental perspective, insurance must be paid by the polluter. So if you did not know, you just look at the goods in transit insurance for like 2.5 million and that's it. And if there is an issue, it already comes back to yourself as an operator. So we have to be aware of those costs that is associated with the products that we are moving. But also I want to flag on one of the slides that Richard has indicated, has already flagged and discussed with us, is an element of the manufacturers. So many times, Richard, I've been asked, who are the manufacturers of certain products? Or how do I get business? Where do I get it? So that slide is very, very important, because that's where your prospective client is coming from, as a person in the logistics business. So you need to know exactly where to access and get potential opportunities, or if you're in a big corporate looking for organizations to work with, that's exactly what Richard has shared with us. So thank you, Richard, for that. You can proceed.
Thanks, Level.
Sorry, for those that are online, please, I don't see any questions coming my way. What is happening with you? It's no longer cold like last weekend and Monday. Please send your questions through. If you ask you have an area that requires some clarity, please send them through. We will be willing to respond to you. Please.
Okay, thanks, Level. Right, so let's look at some of the modes of road transport. And I'll go into a bit more detail, but we're going to talk about bulk tankers, what I've called mini bulk. It's not the formal, but it's just, that's why it's inverted commas. IBCs, which is the intermediate bulk containers, drums and packages. So often we think it's always in bulk. It's definitely not always in bulk, but these are the different options. So your traditional bulk tanker for fuel, this is just off the GRW engineering website. This is your traditional fuel tanker. It is generally in this country built of aluminium for various reasons. It's a lighter construction. The interesting thing about aluminium is if this tanker of fuel catches alight, the aluminium, it doesn't explode. The aluminium melts. So it's actually a safety factor as well. The aluminium melts down at the level of the fuel. So as the fuel burns off the surface, the aluminium melts down, so it doesn't dump the whole load of fuel on the ground. The structure actually maintains its shape, and the top section burns off until eventually, when the whole load is burnt, if it can't be extinguished, which very often it can't because of the heat being generated, all that is left is literally the axles, the steel components, and a puddle of aluminium. And it's actually quite distressing to see what used to be a beautiful tanker is now just literally a puddle of cold, dry aluminium. So it's quite a sight to see. But that's one of the safety features. So that's what we will see driving around at the filling station when we're putting in fuel in our cars. That's the sort of traditional petrol tanker, I'm going to call it, fuel tanker. The other tanker configuration, also in bulk, is for solvents. You can transport solvents in an aluminium tanker. You can transport it in a fuel tanker, but you've got to be careful that the compatibility of the fuel and the solvent with the seals, etc. You get fuel seals. And this is on all your valves. You get seals that are resistant to fuel, but not to chemicals, and vice versa. So you've got to be careful if you want to start getting innovative and transporting fuel in one direction and solvents in another. There was a company that was doing it fairly successfully at one point in time. They were transporting fuel from Secunda to Durban, transporting solvents to Durban, and then bringing fuel back. And they did this for a number of years, but they had adapted their equipment to be able to do that in that backloading in each direction. So the picture on your screen now is a typical solvent tanker. You'll notice that generally it looks the same as the fuel tanker, but these are generally constructed of stainless steel. Stainless steel is easier to clean, so you don't get contamination if you're changing products or you're needing to wash out your tanker to handle different products. It's much easier to clean and to dry. This one is insulated. You'll sort of notice it's stainless steel is silver. This is a white color. This has got an insulation on it. Some products need to be insulated to keep them at a lower than ambient temperature. This one has got what is known as a little pup tanker on the back, or in Afrikaans they call it a kalfie, a little calf that's following the mother tanker. Used to be a very popular concept in years gone by, then fell away because the stability of those little tankers is not the greatest, but they seem to have now come up with a design of being more stable. So on a long distance operation, if you can get another 10,000 liters into that little tanker, it all helps to bring down your cost. But a stainless steel, well, aluminium tanker as well, very expensive. Stainless steel is probably even more expensive. So you're looking at a couple of million rand for the tanker, excluding the truck. You're probably looking at 2.5 million rand for that tanker, and then another 2 million for the truck. So call it 5 million to put that rig on the road. So another risk is the high capital cost of the equipment. And when we start going into chemicals, we're talking solvents here. Then later sessions, we can talk about your corrosives, your acids. All of those all require different grades of stainless steel and coatings and that sort of stuff because of the corrosive nature of the product. But we're not going to go there. We're talking here on flammables. But it may look very similar, but it's inside under the skin. It could be very different depending on what product is being transported. So those are your two, let's call it the bulk, large bulk volume tankers. This picture now is what I'm calling a mini bulk tanker. They've become very popular. You'll see them. There's even companies now that are offering to come and refuel your generator for you on site. They come in with a little tanker like this, and they pump it into your generator in your factory. Even some residential complexes have got generators these days. Rather than going with a can to the filling station, they'll come in and they'll pump into your tank for you. I'm not going to go into great detail, but this particular tank, as you see it now, is actually legal. Anything over 1,000 liters for diesel, 500 liters for petrol, needs to comply fully with the transport of dangerous goods requirements, which includes the manufacturing of that tanker to a particular standard, which we'll talk about shortly, known as SANS 1518. And so there are, as I say, a lot of these tankers going into the market. They look very neat, but deep down they're a risk because they are not built to the required standard. So again, be careful before you go in and start doing this sort of business, or going in with somebody who's doing it. Just be careful. Again, they're getting fire permits from the municipal fire departments. The police are none the wiser, but your insurance company, again, is going to be looking over your shoulder to say, is that tanker compliant? Then it's not that popular in this country, but it's starting to, and I've seen quite a few operators now, instead of running a tanker like this, they are running these IBCs, or an intermediate bulk container. It's 1,000 liters. So technically, loaded with diesel, you are allowed to transport this on the back of your bakkie, your pickup, without any documentation, without any compliance requirements. But if you put 2 of these on the back of your bakkie, you then have to have full compliance. These IBCs have to be marked, the vehicle has to be marked, your driver has to be compliant, etc., etc., etc. So again, be careful. It looks easy. You can buy these tanks secondhand at not a great cost. They are dangerous goods compliant. They are designed to transport dangerous goods and solvents and the likes. But be careful, again, as I say, the number of tanks that you put onto the back of your vehicle. And the Rose Foundation, you may have had dealings with the Rose Foundation. They have mainly entrepreneurs who have got a bakkie with a tank on the back, and they go around collecting used oil from your motor dealerships, etc., etc. And that's classed as flammable liquid as well. It's lubricating oil is not flammable, not classed as dangerous goods, but once it's used, it picks up additives, etc., from the fuels, and there's a bit of it's a borderline whether they are classed as flammable or not. But the Rose Foundation, their safety data sheets indicate that they classify those used oils as flammable. So all their transporters, if they're going more than 1,000 liters, have to be fully compliant with transport of dangerous goods. Then we go into your normal, I'm going to just call them your drums. Plastic drums are becoming very popular these days. And those that are a little bit older, like me, are used to the old steel 210 liter or 44-gallon drum. Again, make sure that the drums that you're using are compliant to handle flammable liquids. There are various requirements that you need to comply with. United Nations, UN construction requirements that need to be in place, and labeling. So we need to just make sure that if you're going to be getting involved in this, that those drums are compliant. And then we get down to packages. And when you're talking about UN compliance, if you look at that cardboard box on the screen, on the face, on the side facing us, you'll see there's two arrows that are vertical arrows. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but there's two vertical arrows. And just to the left of it, there's a circle with a UN, U and an N underneath it, and then a number next to it. That tells you that that packaging is United Nations compliant. It's been tested to contain the product that it's containing, that they do drop tests, et cetera, on it. You'll see on the left, there's a flammable liquid diamond. So everything, when we talk dangerous goods, there's legislation, there are standards involved to ensure that these products are transported in a safe manner. So packages, these are one form. The other form is, as I said, transport in drums and in plastic 20-liter packs. So I think some people call them blow packs, but a 20-liter container with a solvent in it. Again, they need to be compliant with the United Nations requirements. They have to be labeled accordingly. And this is where things tend to go a little bit haywire, in that a company might go and buy 20,000 liters of solvents from one of the manufacturers or suppliers, put it into their tank somewhere, or just decant it straight from their tanker into 20-liter packs, and off they go and they sell those into the market with no labeling, no accreditation, no safety requirements, etc. So the quality of that packaging is sometimes not of the best. Then the next point is there's quite a lot of reconditioned packaging, especially in your steel drums, because they're expensive and you don't want to discard them after one use. You want to start using them on a more regular basis. There are reconditioners out there who are cleaning out those drums. Sometimes they take the whole top of the drum off, they clean it out, and then they weld that top back onto the drum. Some of the quality of that reconditioned packaging is also not great. I know of transporters that have loaded drums of solvent to go into Zambia or somewhere, and by the time they get to Bike Bridge, 2 or 3 of those drums are leaking, and there's solvents leaking all over the road, etc., and the truck standing in the middle of at Bike Bridge, and the loads leaking. So be careful about that. So which leads me on to the next point. Your leaks and failures in transit can have serious repercussions for a transporter. Also, your load securing on your packaged loads is often difficult, especially when you've got drums and plastic packs, different sizes, different shapes, can be very difficult to secure the load securely, and then also not to damage the packaging while you're trying to secure the load. So those are some of the issues around packages. So if we go back to our road tankers for fuels and solvents, I mentioned just now, there's a high initial cost for your equipment, and there's a high maintenance cost. And a lot of people are not aware of it, but a dangerous goods vehicle must be inspected by a competent person basically monthly. It actually says between 4 to 6 weeks. So it doesn't help just to say, well, my truck can do 40,000 kilometers between a service, off we go. That combination, the vehicle and the tanker, or even if it's a flat deck trailer, needs to be inspected between 4 to 6 weeks. Doesn't say by a mechanic, doesn't say by a workshop, it just says by a competent person. But again, you need to ensure that whoever's doing that inspection is competent. Again, if something goes wrong, you need to be able to to stand up in court and say, well, Mr. X, Mrs. X, whoever did the inspection was competent and they are competent for the following reasons. They've been in the industry, they've done this, whatever it might be. So part of that inspections as well, SANS 10231, SANS South African National Standards 10231, which is referenced in the Road Traffic Act, so it makes it law. Annexure F details the inspection requirements for dangerous goods vehicles. It tells you what the frequency is. It tells you that the driver must do a daily inspection on the vehicle. Then you must do your monthly and 6 weekly inspections. Then you've got to do, and depending on the product, you've got to do annual inspections. For our solvent and fuel tankers, your annual inspection is your annual roadworthy that all commercial vehicles have got to go through. And then every 36 months, the vehicle needs to be fully recertified by a competent authority to ensure that that vehicle is still good to go, that there's no leaks, there's no funnies, that it can transport the load safely. Then every 72 months, the tanker thickness needs to be checked, the wells need to be inspected, the valves, the inlet, outlet valves, etc., all need to be tested. While we're talking about valves, there's also overfill protection on fuel tankers, which needs to be checked. You cannot get into Sasol or into any of the Sasol facilities to load unless you've got valve inspections, pipeline inspections, overfill sensor inspections, and they've got to be done at least on an annual basis. So those are also extra costs. Your discharge pipes, your delivery pipes need to be pressure tested and electrical continuity tested. Preferably the electrical continuity testing once a month. The reason for that is in a discharge pipe on a fuel tanker, there is the pipe itself has got a electrical wire, I'm going to call it. It's actually the sheath on the outside, which protects the hose, is part of the electrical continuity, and it helps with the earthing of the tanker. So that's why we've got to check the continuity on it. The fuel delivery meters on the tankers must be tested every 12 months in terms of the, if you're selling fuel through that meter, it needs to be tested and assized every 12 months. And all that being said, a well-maintained tanker can, however, provide you with many years of service. So if you're going to go and spend the money to go and get yourself involved in the tanker business, look after it well, because it's going to cost you to do it, but in the long run, it's going to save you money because it can give you very good long service. But on that, if you're going out into the market to buy equipment, don't go looking for bargains when you're purchasing tanker equipment. It's a bargain because there's a reason for it. It's an old tanker. It doesn't meet the requirements. It's with new technology, tankers are being built bigger and lighter to carry more volume. So you might be buying a tanker which can carry less volume, but it might also be old technology. And so the next point comes along that the industry loading gantries. So whether it's a fuel gantry or a solvent gantry, have very specific design and equipment requirements for loading of fuel and solvents. So have you got the right loading couplings? Or have you got overfill sensors? Is there vapor recovery on the vehicles? From an environmental point of view, most tankers transporting fuels and and solvents these days must have vapor recovery, so that any vapors that are generated in the process are recovered and go back into the tanks. So you might go and buy a tanker, and then you arrive at your loading site, and they'll say to you, no, this is wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, and it's going to cost you a whole bomb of money to get your tanker compliant. Which then leads to the next point, SANS 151H, which is also South African national standard, and also incorporated into the Road Traffic Act. The title of that standard is the Transport of Dangerous Goods Design, Construction, Testing, Approval, and Maintenance of Road Vehicles and Portable Tanks. So your tanker that you purchase needs to be built to that SANS 151H standard. There's a plate on your tanker which tells you what standard it was built to. Make sure that you understand what that plate is saying. And SANS 151H is the minimum. There was a standard SABS 1398, which was the standards, and there's still tankers out there that are running under that standard. But the next bullet point, tankers that are 15 years and older must be upgraded and verified every 3 years. So if you've got an old tanker that's got a plate built to SABS 1398, that tanker has to be upgraded to at least the SANS 151H standard before it can go in to a gantry to go and load. So again, be careful what you're buying. And often it's cheaper to go and buy a new tanker than it is to upgrade an old tanker, because the technology, the material that was used, the fittings, et cetera, are so different that it's often, as I said, cheaper to buy a new tanker than to upgrade your existing tanker, especially on fuel, chemicals, solvents, maybe not quite as dramatic, but on fuel tankers, definitely. And that tanker then has to be inspected every 3 years to ensure that it still complies with the minimum standard. So if you look at SANS 151H, it's doesn't appear too onerous, but there's a clause in SANS 151H which states that there are requirements in that standard that must comply with the ADR requirements. And SANS 151H is based closely on the ADR. And I've put European in brackets. It used to be called the European Standard for the Transport of Dangerous Goods. The European has fallen away. This is now just known as the Standard for the Transport of Dangerous Goods. And we've included some local specific requirements to suit our own conditions in this country. And ADR, and I'm not very good at my French, but the ADR is derived from the French name for the treaty. Oops, sorry. Accord, whatever, international dangerous. So ADR is a French term, but it's used now as the standard in the European or in the EU, European Union standard for the transport of dangerous goods. So there's this clause opens up a large area of requirements, and the ADR is standards are available on the internet free of charge, but they go into all the detail about what thickness material, what welds must be used, what et cetera goes, and that's where the detail lies. So if you're going to go and buy a new tanker, go to one of the reputable tanker builders and ensure that your tanker is being built to SANS 151H. So yeah, okay. We've seen this slide before, but this now, I just want to reiterate the marking on your vehicles, your placards as we know them. In international terms, I talk about vehicle labeling. We talk about vehicle placarding. There must be a placard which looks similar to what you see on the slide. Top left-hand corner is here. It's a 3286 number. That's your UN number, United Nations number. The block below that is your operator telephone number, which must be available 24 hours a day. And the block below that is your emergency contact number. So if you're working for Sasol, you can put the Sasol emergency number in there. Some of the other manufacturers have their own numbers if you are contracted to them. The minimum is that you must put your spill response cleanup company or your insurance company number in there. So if the vehicle's involved in an accident, they're going to phone you as the operator or your nominated representative on their 24-hour number. It can be a cell phone number, and they may phone the your spill cleanup for advice on how what to do, how to contain the spill or whatever until the spill cleanup companies can get there. On the diamond, we've seen that flammable liquid diamond. We spoke about that previously. This particular product on the top right-hand side has got a subsidiary diamond, which is it's a flammable liquid. Its main hazard is flammable, but it's also corrosive and it's also toxic. So those are subsidiary risks, which you may find on some products. These markings, these placards must be on both sides of the vehicle, and there must be a similar placard on the rear. So there must be 3 placards on each tanker. If you're running, we showed you that little picture of the little Colfie tanker at the back. That must also have 3 placards on it. So each tanker must have 3 placards. The no smoking, no naked flames, and often there's now a requirement for no cell phones. Those are normally, they're not dangerous goods legislation requirements, but they are fire brigade. So if you want to get a fire permit or dangerous goods permit from your local fire brigade, fire service, they're going to want to see those warning signs on your tanker as well. Then on that same score, this is more for interest. There's been an incident or a couple of incidents recently, which I'll explain. The marking, so it goes back to your marking. The marking on the vehicles is covered by SANS 10232 Part 1, which is the standard around the marking and placarding of your vehicle. And it states in that standard that petroleum-based products, for example, diesel, which is a UN 1202, petrol, which is UN 1203, kerosene or paraffin 1223, aviation fuel 1863, may be placarded with the generic UN 1203, either singularly or as a mixed load. So you'll see if you're traveling around town, you stop behind a fuel tanker, you'll see that it has got a placard on it that says 1203. So where on this screen it was 3286, on a fuel tanker it's going to be a placard 99% of the time with a UN number of 1203. The reason for that is because fuel tankers and most of your fuel products are compatible. A fuel tanker might transport a load of petrol this morning and a load of diesel this afternoon. Or it might load half a load of petrol and half a load of diesel. So it was decided by industry that as long as it has the UN number for petrol, which is 1203, which is your most hazardous product of all of those, then you can transport any of those products under 1203. However, it is recommended that a tank vehicle which is dedicated to any of these products uses the appropriate UN number for the product on the placard. So if you're only running diesel, rather only put your diesel placard 1202. But the underlying proviso on this whole thing is if you're running 1203 is on your placard and you are in fact you're transporting diesel, then you need to carry the transport emergency card for diesel. Or if you're running a mixed product, if you're running petrol and diesel, you must have a transport emergency card on your vehicle for petrol and for diesel. So if there is an incident, whatever, then at least you've got the correct transport emergency card on the vehicle that the emergency services can get hold of. We've had incidents right at the bottom. I'll comment, not all traffic officers understand this provision in the law. We've had incidents in Heidelberg and Gauteng where transporters have been fined and threatened to be taken to court and all sorts of things because they're running diesel under 1203. So it's one of those issues that if you're not aware of the legislation, you might not be aware that you can or can't do. So, and this is a recent issue that's come up. So I thought I'd bring it to your attention at this point in time. And I think that brings me to the end of my presentation. Lots of information. But as I said, if you've got any specific questions, send them through to Lebo, or you can contact me directly. So with that, Lebo, I'm not sure whether you want to ask any questions, if there's any specific questions that have come up.
Well, instead of my questions, I'm just going to focus on some of the notes and questions that has been sent on the chat box. I think one of the questions was that please elaborate on some of the jargon because most of this is fairly new. That was one of the requests, and the second one was which companies can you suggest to assist with the HASCAM compliance? Richard is, and he can always refer you. Richard, you will give the context to the guys here, and then the other question is, what is the fair cost of getting a 2-ton vehicle compliance? Because I've been getting expensive quotes. And then number 4 is, what is the cost of a mini bulk tanker? And how do I become compliant with it? So I think those are the main questions that has been sent through.
Yeah, well, costs, I'm I can't quote any costs, but if you want to send those through to me, send me an email or whatever, then I can at least give some pointers on where to start looking for those type of answers.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, because what we will do, because you've already, I've jotted down all these questions, Richard, what we will do is when we send the recording, the link to the recording to the participants, we'll also send them the responses on. Yes. Colleagues, I think what's very important, please remember that when we are moving dangerous goods, there's certain standards, there's certain requirements from the safety perspective, the squash requirements, especially from the chemical, manufacturing sector itself, whereby you are just not going to be allowed to do business without complying with some of these requirements. There's a cost side, but what I like is that Richard is able to give you a view in terms of what is it, what are flammable liquids, the types of flammable liquids that we know out there in the industry, but also who are the manufacturers. And those manufacturers, those are your potential clients in the industry, but also giving us a context in terms of the modes of transport that you can use in terms of moving these liquid products as well. The environmental issues and also the rules of the games. And the rules of the games are very important in really running this business. And even being a professional out there, if you're a transporter or you are a logistics manager or you're a transport manager in the industry, you need to know these requirements so that when you are managing and you are also supporting some businesses out there, you know exactly what is required from the quality, from the environmental side as well in the industry. Richard, thank you so much for your insight. I hope you get to enjoy your holiday. And yes, all the questions that are coming through, guys, please make sure that any questions you send them through to us. I've shared our email address, coaching@syncpoint.co.za. I know some of the questions we are addressing us on our live sessions on Instagram and Facebook as well. In terms of negotiation, I can see there's information and questions that are coming through in terms of how to negotiate the contracts when you are new in the industry. It is all part of our coaching circle, so please make sure that you follow our pages as to when we are discussing these items, any information that you're looking at, and looking forward to hosting you on our 4th series. We will communicate with you on time so that you can log in onto our session. Richard, thank you so much for your time. Thank you everyone for making time in joining our session this morning, and see you again soon. Richard, thank you again. Enjoy your holiday.
Thank you, Lebo. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.